Hello and welcome. While I love to read books, sometimes I get a hankering to watch a movie instead. And especially on rainy days when it is blustery outside and a little bit chilly, just feels like the perfect day to curl up on the couch and maybe not choose a book that afternoon, but instead choose a movie. So I am going to share book to movie adaptations that I think are worth your time. Growing up, I read The Borrowers by Mary Norton. This is the story of Pod, Homily, and their daughter Ariette, who live underneath of floorboards in the kitchen. They are tiny little people and they are borrowers. They go up where the humans live and take what they need with the idea that they're not thieves, they're borrowers. I found this Studio Ghibli movie called Ariette, and it is The Borrowers retold. And so it, as a movie adaptation, I just really think it is lush in the artistic renderings of what the house looks like, what the world outside looks like, what the area that Ariette and her parents live in. I just love it so much. And I actually really like how the story was rewritten, especially the ending. I just think it's less traumatizing. There's a better sense of closure. So I really would say that if you're trying to figure out, do you want to read The Borrowers or watch Ariette, I would recommend watching Ariette. The Princess Bride book to movie adaptation, I would absolutely say that the movie is unequivocally better than the book. I grew up watching the movie, so there is a nostalgia factor in that opinion. But I recently read this book for the Cozy Reader book club that I co-host with Jen at Jen's Reading Life, and I was so disappointed. Jen had recommended, after I expressed that I listen to As You Wish by Carrie Elways, who is Wesley, or the Man in Black, the actor who plays that character. And in this book, it's not very long, and the audiobook is fabulous because he's the one narrating it. He shares his life during the time of making that movie. And so you actually get the other, like Robin Wright actually speaks on this audiobook recording, and Billy Crystal is also part of it. And so the production staff, all of that are on there. That is a phenomenal book to read if you want to read a book about the Princess Bride. But the book itself by William Goldman, I think, is a screenwriter. And so this very much reads like that. It's very disjointed. He pulls you out of the story and speaks to the reader. There's this tongue-in-cheek, sarcastic voice that he uses that I'm just not fond of. And so if I'm talking about the Princess Bride, I would tell anyone 100% of the time, watch the movie, don't read the book. Sorry, William Goldman. Next, I have Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. It is a TV series with, I think, 8 or 9 episodes in it that Apple TV produced. They're head and shoulders above this book. In this book, we follow Elizabeth Zott and her daughter. And Elizabeth, as we begin the book, is a widow. She is trying to kind of battle her way through the science industry as a female, as a widow who is raising a child. And through that, we learn Elizabeth's backstory. The thing that I love about the TV series is they have 2 really phenomenal actors that play Elizabeth Zott and then the main male character. They have a phenomenal actor who's playing the little girl. They just did such a wonderful job on that part of it. And I also appreciated the writing. They added in some more historical civil rights pieces than what was in the book, how they handled some really difficult interactions with men in positions of power, where Elizabeth in the book had some kind of violent interactions. They handled that very discreetly and well. There is, I will say, one trigger warning. When you get to the show where we go back into Elizabeth Zott's background, there are some self-injurious behavior that's very difficult to watch. And so that would be an episode that maybe you would want to kind of skip or move past those parts. But otherwise, the TV show, again, 100% of the time, someone who's interested in reading this book, I would really recommend watching that TV series instead of reading this. Next, I have Anola Holmes. This is a book series. It's middle grade, but I know when I've mentioned it on this channel, I've really said it really pushes to upper middle grade or young YA because it is pretty violent in my recollection. And there's also some complex, mature themes in these books. This is the series that follows Anola Holmes, who is the younger sister of Sherlock Holmes. And at the beginning of the first book, her mother abandons her and she is left to fend for herself in the world. Sherlock is kind of there. Her older brother, Mycroft, is kind of there, but really Anola is really left to fend on her own. And I watched both. There's 2 movies out right now that have Millie Bobby Brown playing Anola Holmes. We have Henry Cavill playing Sherlock, and Helena Bonham Carter plays Enola's mother. And so there are some pretty heavy-hitting actors in it. Again, it is a PG-13 because it is pretty violent. But in my experience, the books are not as good as the 2 movies are. The reason why I think the movie is better is because I think it dives a little bit deeper into Sherlock and Mycroft's involvement in her life. It also has her mother much more involved. And so in this, her mother's really on the periphery. She really isn't able to kind of communicate with her. And in the movie, they bring that to the forefront. And it's just a lot more entertaining, I feel, than the books were. Next is Stardust by Neil Gaiman. This is a book in which we follow a character who ends up being a star that falls to Earth and develops a human form. There is a love story, there is treachery and danger, there are witches. Neil Gaiman is a master storyteller. However, the movie Stardust that has Michelle Pfeiffer, it has Robert De Niro, it has Claire Danes. She plays the star who falls to Earth. I also think the cinematography is beautiful. And again, it is an older movie, so there is, you have to take that with a grain of salt. But I do think they really do a phenomenal job with the humor and the sweeping story and the intergenerational connections that they're making there, and then the danger. And so I really, again, if someone is asking me like, which should I do with Stardust, read it or watch it, I would really recommend that someone watches it. So now we get into potentially controversial opinions, I think. There are people who might feel very strongly about Stardust, but I know I'm definitely treading now into dangerous waters. So bear with me and remember, it's just my opinion. So the next I would say is Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. She also wrote 3 additional books. She wrote Shadow of the Night and Book of Life. There's also Time Convert as well that she added at the end to make this not a trilogy, but kind of what happened with some of the characters in this later. She is coming out with, I believe it is called Oracle of the Blackbird, that is coming out in July, that continues this trilogy. But this is a TV series that has been adapted from the books, and this was done really well, which as we continue, not all of them have been done so well with following it, but they have season 1 doing Discovery of Witches, season 2 is Shadow of Night, and season 3 is The Book of Life. And it's just done so well. The main character is played by Matthew Good, who plays this character so well that I really have a hard time even kind of separating them now in my mind. But this is the story of a witch who doesn't really want to be a witch. She hasn't really honed her powers at all. She ends up meeting a vampire, and she starts to realize that she does have powers. This is a love story, forbidden love between a vampire and a witch. And we actually go back to England in the times of Queen Elizabeth. That historical fiction part is phenomenal. So Deborah Harkness is, I believe, a history professor out in California. I think she has a PhD in it. She's very well versed in history. And so the characters that she chooses to include in here and the persona that she has the vampire take on in this time period are all based in historical fact, which is really intriguing. And then, of course, we have the denouement in the third book where everything kind of comes together. One of the reasons why I love the TV series, as I mentioned, is, again, the actors and how well they play it. I think there's a richness and a depth that you get in that TV series that you're not getting in the book. Secondly, I think there are more open door romance scenes in here. There is a little bit of that in the TV series, but again, it's something that you could just kind of skip ahead slightly, not miss a lot, and not feel like it's saturated with it. Where as I was reading this, I really felt like there was a lot more of that in there. And so as I'm recommending to someone a really great series to watch in the autumn season, I would recommend that somebody watch the TV series over reading the trilogy. Bear with me on this one. I have the Shadow and Bone trilogy. My opinion is not necessarily that the books are better than the TV series, because with the TV series, it has taken the Shadow and Bone series and kind of intertwined it with her Six of Crows and the King of Scars, I think, duology. And so she's taken 3 different stories that she's told in duologies and trilogies and braided them together into the TV series. And so characters that meet in the TV series are not necessarily meeting in the Shadow and Bone trilogy. And I think there's wide varying opinions on whether that was a good decision or not. I personally liked it. I loved the casting for Inej and Kaz Brecker, and I loved the casting for Alina. I loved the casting for Mal. I loved the casting for the Darkling. So many good choices there. And again, I loved how she braided the stories together. My understanding is that Leigh Bardugo was part of the writing of the TV series. And I think that sometimes when an author, because I think she was very young, this was one of, I think, her first works, that when an author has a chance to kind of go back and say, okay, well, I kind of wish I had done this, or maybe I should have thought this through a little bit more. I do think with the TV series that comes out later, and the author is involved in the writing part of that, there is a potential for like, okay, let's kind of tweak this and improve upon this. And I think there were pieces to that. The issue that we get into with the TV series is 2 things. Number 1, it was not greenlit for the 3rd series. And so you really would want this to be series 1, series 2, series 3, because it's too much to try to combine it. And I think they realized with season 2 that there was potential that it was not going to be greenlit for season 3. And so they started to cram a lot into that 2nd season. And so there was a lot going on. I still really enjoyed the 2nd season. I'm still heartbroken that they did not get greenlit for the 3rd season. I'm still hopeful that someone will pick it up and will continue it. I don't know, maybe that's wishful thinking. But so that's the first issue. The second issue is in that trying to cram everything in, and in that Leigh Bardugo kind of trying to maybe make some tweaks that could make the tale better, they changed the arc of some of the characters. And as a reader, you get so invested in that character, and you've read it and you're expecting that arc. And when it doesn't, when it deviates, there's like this level of disappointment. But for anyone who loves steampunk kind of a feel, fantasy, just a really intriguing cast of characters where you have the savior of a culture and you've got kind of this underground heist kind of a culture. And then you have this love story that spans across cultures that typically do not this Romeo Juliet can't be in a relationship kind of love story all combined. I would say to watch the TV series because that's what you're going to get. If you want the big investment of reading the trilogy and the other 4 books and really kind of digging in, I think you could watch the show and then decide like, I love this. I want to get into it a little bit more and then read the books. That's my take. This is potentially the most contentious opinion that I have, which is for Dune by Frank Herbert. They have just come out with 2 movies. This book is bounded into this omnibus. It's actually 3 books that was all really part of one. And then there's this huge series behind it. The fans of Dune are very intense. These books were written in the 1970s. Once Frank Herbert passed away, then his son took up the mantle. This just has a cult-like following. So I would not sit here and say the movies are better than the books simply because, well, I don't think it's true, number one. And number two, I don't want the fans coming after me. But I will say, for someone who wants to learn about the story, the movies make it very accessible. This is not the easiest read. I actually listened to a dramatized audiobook version of this where you had different characters for different voices and so that you could kind of differentiate the different people. But it's not an easy book to read. There's a lot of intergalactic politics going on. There is world building where you're trying to understand the different planets and the history and how they all interact. There is also, I think a lot of people believe there's misogyny in here based on how women are written and the female characters are written, the different cultures are written. There's a lot of underlying complexity and also obvious complexity with this book. And so if you're trying to really get out of gatekeeping and allow access to a very difficult sci-fi novel to be exposed to a very broad group of people, the movie is the best way to do that. So if I'm talking to a friend and it's somebody who's really not that familiar with reading sci-fi, even people who love fantasy, I think this is potentially a stretch into more sci-fi. And people who love sci-fi, this starts to feel a little bit fantasy. And so it's very genre bending. And if somebody were like, should I read it or watch the movie? Again, I think there's a lot of people would say, oh, you have to read it first because there is that belief that you read the book before the movie. But with Dune, I just think it's something that makes it accessible to everyone. And so anyone could watch the movie and really get into it. I just think the new movie, the Denis Villeneuve movie version is really great and one that I would recommend people watch if they're intimidated by this big tome. All right, you guys, thanks so much for watching. Let me know what movies you prefer to the book. I would love to hear your opinions. Also, let me know if you agree or disagree, or maybe are interested in seeing some of the movies that I've mentioned, and come back and let me know what you think. Until next time.